Every 4 or so years, Apple takes the opportunity to redesign what is arguably their most important laptop, the MacBook Pro. While the super thin and super limited MacBook is svelte and pretty, it's too limited and not powerful enough for those with greater professional needs from their laptop. The MacBook Air was a great balance of power and thinness, but it is now dreadfully obsolete and exists in Apple's Limbo lineup, sold for the same price it always has been, but with no refreshed internals and the same bad low-resolution screen by modern standards. So, the 13-inch and 15-inch MacBook Pros exist as the ideal balance of power and portability for those willing to spend Apple's higher prices and who love macOS. However, as the MacBook Pros increasingly emphasize portability over the years, the 13-inch has essentially become the new MacBook Air, a low power but high portability and decently functional all-around machine, with the 15-inch taking the place of the previous flagship 17-inch models as the heavyweight of the lineup for those who really need beefy processor and graphical power from their laptops. With the 2016, and if history is any indication, up to 2019 models of the new MacBook Pro, Apple has faced a lot of backlash over a, let's just say, minimalist port configuration, unreliable and uncomfortable keyboard, and overall emphasis on high price and thinness over power and flexibility. So, is that hate valid? Is this generation of MacBook Pros really flawed? And what is it like to use in the real world? I've had my 2016 15-inch Touch Bar model with a fairly high-end configuration for about 16 months now, and this is my long-term, real-world review of the new 15-inch MacBook Pro. I'm a student, so much of my official work is really just using a web browser and productivity software, which most of the time I'm more happy doing on my iPad. However, in my free time, I do a lot of graphic design, video editing, and audio editing for both my YouTube channel and podcast. For these kinds of tasks, you really want a beefy computer. But since I travel a lot and move between places, it's essential that my main workhorse is portable. If you're in the same boat when it comes to needing a machine that can travel and run macOS software and apps, the MacBook Pro is really your only choice. Otherwise, why are you looking at laptops? The newly released and expensive, but well worth it if you consider its specs, iMac Pro is great, and the soon-to-be-announced Mac Pro will likely be modular, upgradable, and very powerful. But the issue with Apple labeling this MacBook Pro while having a computer like the iMac Pro in its lineup is pretty apparent. Unlike the super high-end iMac Pro, this is a machine built not for having loads of CPU cores, graphics power, or RAM. It's unapologetically an Ultrabook with higher-end parts and Pro branding. I love the build quality and portability of the thin and light chassis, but I and many other on-the-go pros would probably be even happier with a balance between power and thinness, more in line with the previous generation Retina MacBook Pros. Its quad-core hyper-threaded processor and dedicated AMD graphics aren't unusable for pro tasks. They get the job done, especially if you use Apple's very optimized Final Cut and Logic Pro software, but the opportunity for either a thicker chassis or reintroduction of a 17-inch model with more than 16 gigabytes of RAM and a nicer AMD or hey, maybe even NVIDIA dedicated graphics chip is really nice to dream about. Now, the nice thing about this redesign is that while it may be underpowered and struggling to keep up in many professional applications, you certainly won't hear it. Apple did a really nice job with the cooling design here. When the fans do come on, they're impressively quiet and unobtrusive. You really won't even notice them until you're encoding a heavy video file for a long period of time or doing something else that's similarly strenuous. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about the battery. Apple opted for a smaller battery with this design, claiming that the newer processors require less power, so the difference in battery life will be offset by that. Much as I would like that to be true, that's just not the case. You will get the claimed 10 hours watching YouTube or sending emails, but start using power-hungry apps like Logic or Final Cut, and it becomes clear that while newer processors can run really efficiently at idle conditions, they still hog power when you push them to their limits. I'd be lucky to get 4 hours editing anything. And then there's the peripherals. Let's start with the big glass rectangle on the bottom. Now, trackpads on Macs are consistently excellent, and I think most people will agree here too. I almost never use a mouse on my MacBook unless I'm playing a game. The large tracking surface and great palm rejection do wonders here. Also, Apple's prowess in haptic feedback makes clicking anywhere having the same effect, because it's not actually a button mechanism acting, but simply a pressure-detecting electromagnet that makes you think the trackpad is being depressed when you press your finger on it. In actuality, it's hardly moving at all, save for the electromagnet vibrations. Press on the top or bottom, the firmness is the same. Now, this is seriously quite cool and one of those main niceties keeping me on Mac hardware. The keyboard is another story. While some claim to like its firmness and clicky feel, I and many others can't agree. In fact, call me a heretic, but I think the iPad Pro Smart Keyboard is more comfortable to type on than this hard, unforgiving, low-travel mess. On the MacBook Pro, I'm always either making typos or getting finger pain from the lack of key travel and overly firm feel. And that's to say nothing of the keyboard reliability nightmare many have been having with stuck keys and expensive and frequent trips to the Apple Store. And that's quite serious. Apple had better address this in the upcoming 2018 model, because while the feel of a keyboard is subjective, you can't have one that simply doesn't work. The fact that I'm scripting this review on my iPad Smart Keyboard should tell you all you need to know. The keyboard isn't all terrible though. Something really underrated about this generation of MacBook Pros is the awesome backlighting, which is now more distinct and subtle than the light bleeding keyboards you see on older MacBooks and other modern Windows laptops. In the dark, this is one cool looking machine, particularly in space gray. And the Touch Bar, Apple's flagship feature that distinguishes this generation of MacBook Pros, is actually not that bad. You'll see a lot of reviews calling it useless, but after using this machine for a while, I've come to appreciate the apps that take proper advantage of it. Affinity Photo and Designer let you seamlessly adjust brush size with sliders that pop up when you have those tools selected, and videos or galleries in the web and in apps like QuickTime or Photos can easily be skimmed through. It's not the groundbreaking feature Apple wants you to think it is, but I don't mind it at all and have grown used to having it. Now, what about the basics of a laptop? Well, despite its underpowered graphics and lack of configurability, using this day to day is pretty awesome as long as you keep an eye on the battery. The screen, like on any modern Mac, is excellent and gets searingly bright indoors and can easily be seen outside. The speakers are impressive for a laptop and could easily fill a room, and the overall industrial design and material quality is outstanding, even better than the Retina MacBook Pro design of yesteryear. Oh, and everyday use is complemented by a super fast NVMe SSD, although getting the higher end storage is not going to be cheap. Overall though, Apple's expertise at making a laptop here is quite sadly spoiled just because of a terrible keyboard and specs that just don't live up to what they should be. To appreciate this laptop, you have to understand that what Apple's done is just build a really solid thin and light with some pro capabilities, not a desktop replacement beast that just happens to be portable. Now, I also consider ports to be basics, and it's here that I'm really conflicted. Having 4 high-bandwidth Thunderbolt 3 ports that also function as USB-C is incredible, and no other laptop on the market can match that kind of external expandability. You could have an external graphics card for high-end gaming or 3D work, a high-end audio interface, RAID storage array, and a bunch of other fun pro stuff plugged in here. You can even charge it from any of the 4 ports, but for fans of MagSafe, you probably know by now that you won't get magnetically snapping charging cords anymore. The downside to this port configuration is that while these 4 ports are awesome, there's nothing else except an audio jack, so any USB-A, which is the classic style USB connector, or HDMI style connectors won't work, neither will Ethernet. Apple has always been aggressive about shutting ports, and most adapters are fairly inexpensive and not too inconvenient. But the biggest issue here is the lack of an SD card slot. Given the iMac Pro has a high-speed UHS 2 slot, it would be nice to see Apple put one in the 2018 and beyond MacBook Pros, as most video makers and photographers still use normal SD cards. Remember, it's only a few niche cameras from Canon and Sony that happen to use a regular CFast or XQD cards. But when it comes to buying, should you get a new MacBook Pro now, get the old model with more ports and a reliable keyboard and better battery, or should you wait for the new version? Well, if you don't rely on macOS software and apps, I think the new Dell XPS 15 and Surface Book 2 are in many ways superior hardware options on the Windows side. Now, you'll still have to deal with Windows, and you won't be able to use Mac exclusive apps that many pros still use, so do keep that in mind. A lot of people, myself included, are just plainly more comfortable using macOS. So switching is only going to be possible for users of cross-platform software like the Adobe suite who don't mind changing OSs and want higher specs and additional options like 2-in-1 tablet laptop form factors and stylus support. For those of us sticking with the Mac, if you absolutely need a MacBook Pro right now and don't mind having something a little slower in exchange for a cheaper price, reliable keyboard, and better battery, get the 2015 MacBook Pro. Now, there are some really good prices on used and refurbished models, and you can even still buy new ones directly from Apple. Otherwise, I'd highly recommend waiting for the 2018 MacBook Pro. The battery life and performance issues are looking to get a lot better later this year, thanks to a new chip that is both a CPU and GPU in one package from a partnership between Intel and AMD, which will consume less power than separate processors while still receiving the usual iterative CPU improvements, as well as a larger graphics performance increase, almost to GTX 1060 levels, if the rumors are correct. Also, given the keyboard reliability issues and the PR nightmare they have caused for many of their Pro customers, Apple is almost sure to at least fix the reliability, and maybe even design a more comfortable and ergonomic keyboard, more like its desktop Magic keyboards. An SD card slot or some included adapters would be nice, but I wouldn't hold my breath for Apple to actually do that. So where does that leave the 2016 and 2017 models? Well, after using mine as my main machine for over a year, I have to say it is in most ways a super high quality laptop that's great to use as long as I'm not typing too much. But the concerns over the keyboard and battery, in addition to a high price for not a lot of performance, keep me from recommending it unless you really need its features and portability right now and can't wait. If you already have a 15-inch touch bar model like me and you haven't smashed your head in on the keyboard yet, then I'd say to hang in there for the next redesign. Apple has made an amazing laptop, but unfortunately, they've also compromised a lot on what made their laptops so beloved by professionals before. It's not unusable, but it's not exactly what we've come to expect from the MacBook Pro name, unless you're getting one for light tasks like web browsing, in which case you're probably better served by the smaller and cheaper 13-inch model. So, for most of you watching this video, I'm afraid you'll be waiting until at least the summer's WWDC, or maybe even fall for the upgrade with better battery, performance, and keyboard ergonomics. But if the iMac Pro is any indication, it seems Apple is starting to get its head out of the shiny aluminum hole it's been in for the last few years when it comes to Pro products, and it's ready to stop overly emphasizing form over function. They genuinely seem to admit that their current lineup, including the MacBook Pros, has a few flaws. Let's just hope that they fix them. Long live the MacBook Pro. That is, unless you happen to be away from an outlet for a few hours.